Hi guys, so we're ready to start our chapter on carbohydrates, and so I wanted to just take a couple minutes and give you kind of the overview of what we're going to be discussing in this chapter. So we're moving on to another one of our biopolymers. So we spent a lot of time talking about proteins and again thinking about amino acids being connected to make proteins. So now we're going to be doing that same sort of a thought process to think about connecting simple sugars to make disaccharides and polysaccharides. And we'll have a lot of application here in terms of nutrition and in how we think about how different fuels are going to work in our body. So after we kind of revisit that introductory slide that we had a few weeks ago, kind of highlighting the different biopolymers, we'll spend a lot of time talking about the structures of carbohydrates, because understanding the structure of carbohydrates is really important to understanding whether they're fuel or fiber in our body. And so there's another video that's posted on how to think about drawing the 8 different carbohydrates that you need to know the structures of. There's 6 carbohydrates that have 6 carbons, there's 2 that have 5 carbons, and then there's 2 that have 3 carbons. And so we'll spend a lot of time moving forward with those carbohydrates as we learn about processes and intermediary metabolism. And so lots of nomenclature to think about with sugars. So anything that ends in OSE is a sugar, but thinking about aldose versus ketose sugars, and we'll revisit some of the reaction mechanisms that we learned for different sugars. So again, learning how different chemistries happen with sugars is really important. So again, we're going to learn sugars as linear Fisher projections in terms of their structures, but sugars don't tend to exist as linear forms in your body, and that's because they've got a reactive carbonyl containing functional group, whether it's an aldehyde or a ketone. And so nature's way of protecting that reactive functional group is to cyclize sugars. So again, a lot of these sort of gestures are things that we'll be using in class. So cyclization of sugars takes that aldehyde or that ketone functional group and makes it into a hemiacetal or a hemiketal. And so cyclizing those sugars is nature's way of protecting that functional group. Now, we can do additional chemistry and we can link those sugars. So again, that's hemiacetal and hemiketal kind of conversion into acetal and ketal. So we review those reaction mechanisms to understand how that happens. But again, that glycosidic linkage is going to become really important into understanding how different polymerized monosaccharides kind of work in your body. So whether it's sucrose and lactose, and thinking about which one of those is fuel and which one is kind of meant to be something that's more fiber-based and that we can't break that glycosidic linkage. Then we'll talk about cellulose versus starch, and a lot of that has to do with the nature of the linkage that connects those two together. So after we kind of have a decent review of the structures of those, then we'll actually move on to thinking about some more big picture topics with carbohydrate metabolism. Remembering that carbohydrates are not something that your body needs to consume for your own nutrition and metabolism. We can make all the carbohydrates that we need in our body. We do need to consider consuming some important carbohydrates as prebiotics for our gut microbiome. So we'll kind of talk about that and some that work well for that. But we'll talk about the importance of glycogen and look at glycogen structure. We'll talk about glycemic index, and we'll talk about what that is and how different foods affect your insulin levels and what it means to become insulin resistant. We've already kind of talked about this a little bit as we think about diabetes, and so that's kind of something that's kind of gone through as a thread throughout a lot of what we've talked about. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about things that we consume in our diet that are not sugars. So we'll talk about sugar alcohols. We'll talk about 3 of the artificial sweeteners that you're going to see on every restaurant table: the pink packet, the blue packet, and the yellow packet. And we'll talk about what's in them and why they're really problematic. And then we'll talk about some alternative sweeteners. So whether it's something like monk fruit or it's something like stevia, we'll talk about what those are, how their structure affords their function and their ability to serve as an artificial sweetener, and help you guys make decisions about whether or not it's something you want to have in your diet. At the very end, we'll kind of have a neat application talking about the ABO blood groups and how glycosylation of proteins can provide a lot of information about what's going on in your body. So neat chapter on carbohydrates, and look forward to sharing it with you.